All right, friends, welcome back. It's been about a week and a half. Last time I spoke to you guys was on July 4th. I usually take a few weeks off during the summer, pay attention to family and friends, just to get things, vacation. But in these past 2 weeks, something it's in this country has been probably one of the most historical 2 weeks that has ever happened. And I'm going to be doing two videos about it. Now, I usually don't do content on modern political situations. I just don't. I like to stay clear of politics. I used to work in politics. It's a bad basket, so to speak. But I saw a lot of my fellow content creators, and another thing was I wanted to wait. So I'm just going to preface this by saying July 13th, 2024, in Butler, Pennsylvania, President Donald J. Trump was shot. A assassin fired on him, and he was saved by, some people are saying, a centimeter, because he turned his head. Now, before I get into a full discussion of what happened in Butler, I want to bring some historical context into this because, it's historical what happened. These things don't happen, especially in the modern day, as much. Of course, there are situations. A few years ago, I believe President Obama had a recent letter sent to his home right after he left office. I think same thing happened. And, of course, there's the famous shoe incident with President Bush. But assassinations is not something that's new, not even just the United States, but in history in general. Actually, on this series, I have a series about presidential assassins. But I'm going to go into it real quick. Every attempt, successful and unsuccessful. And our first attempt is going to be Andrew Jackson, January 3rd, 1835. Richard Lawrence. Lawrence was a mentally ill man. He believed that he was a reincarnation of an English king and was owed land, and he approached President Jackson with two pistols at the funeral of someone in Tennessee. Now, what ended up happening was both guns misfired, thank God, but Jackson then proceeded to beat Lawrence within an inch of his life. Now, Lawrence survived. The court, I actually think, granted him land. I'm not going to go too in-depth in the aftermaths. Most of these people didn't even make it out. Lawrence is one of the few that did. But it was a fun fact about that attempt, though. It was actually Davy Crockett, the frontiersman, who did it, who stopped Jackson from killing this guy, because Jackson was about to kill this guy. So that was our first attempt in U.S. history of a presidential assassination that we know of. Because there are some people that even think someone like like Harrison and other people might have actually been assassinated, but then there's also theories that they were also just because Washington is built on a swamp, which I was just recently in Washington, but Washington, D.C. built on a swamp, they think they might have actually died of cholera. Next, of course, will be President Abraham Lincoln, April 14th, 1865, at the hands of John Wilkes Booth. Booth was looking for retribution for the Civil War, and he also believed he would be seen as a hero by the South. I actually just finished a series, Manhunt. I was talking about this a few weeks ago in my Civil War tier video. It was a very good series, very few historical inaccuracies. I was actually really enjoying it until a part that came up, which this speaks to something I'm going to discuss later about hyperpolarization. There comes this scene when Edwin Stanton and Jefferson Davis come face to face with each other, and it's interesting because the Justice Department didn't come to existence until the Grant administration, so it's interesting to see the military serving as kind of a police force, but it has also Stanton, like he's a frontline investigator, which did not happen. Stanton had far too much on his plate than to be running around the country and Canada looking for Lincoln's assassins. But there's a scene where Jefferson Davis and Stanton face off, and they're trying to make this like connection that Davis was involved with the assassination, which is highly contested. It's very known that Jefferson Davis wept when he heard that Lincoln was shot. Same thing with people like Robert E. Lee and stuff. And I'm a New Yorker. I have no stake in defending Southerners in the post-Civil War era. I look for facts, for truth. I know we all have our truths, but that is the recorded history. Booth, of course, will be killed. He'll be shot by Boston Corbett. But during this discussion between Davis and Stanton, Davis kind of becomes a zealot for a moment and goes, the Confederacy will rise again, but we'll rise in your government and we'll take over the government from within, and we'll, the war's not over yet. We're still fighting. It was a very, I don't know exactly what the political message was, but there was definitely a message there, which I was like, what? It was very strange. But Booth will be shot by Boston Corbett. He also, his conspirators, because it was actually a grand conspiracy. There was also an attempt to kill Secretary Seward by William Powell, and George Atzerodt, a German immigrant who was part of the Knights of the Golden Circle. That was Booth's gang. Again, I have series on all of these. George Atzerodt was supposed to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson. He got a little tipsy, chickened out, didn't do it. Which, again, thank God, what could have been catastrophic and crippled the federal government, unfortunately only ended with President Lincoln's passing. Our next assassination will be James A. Garfield, July 2nd, 1881, Washington, D.C., same as Lincoln. He'll be shot in the back by Charles J. Guiteau at the D.C. railroad station. Now, there's a crazy fact here, which I'm going to actually explain. It has to do with Robert Todd Lincoln. Robert Todd Lincoln was actually Garfield's Secretary of War, but I'll get into that when we get into a future person. But Guiteau was a mentally ill man, and this is going to be something we sadly see a lot with these folks. Booth is going to be one of the few that was actually politically motivated. A lot of these assassins are mentally ill. Guiteau believed he was owed by the Garfield administration, and sadly, when Garfield, well, not really Garfield, but more Garfield's Secretary of State, refused to hear out Guiteau decided to shoot Garfield. Interesting fact about Garfield, though. Garfield, actually, they're saying it wasn't really the bullet that killed him. It was the prescription that killed him. What the doctors did in the weeks following is actually what killed him. So that's a interesting thing, and that actually will bring us into our next assassination. That'll be William McKinley. That'll be September 6th, 1901, at the Grand American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. He'll be shot by Leon Czolgosz, a disgruntled workman. Now, like I said, Booth is one of the few. Czolgosz is another one. Czolgosz was a follower of anarchism. He was a very strong believer in that ideology, and he saw that everything that McKinley stood for was evil. McKinley was the capitalist, the Gilded Age. He was bringing us out of the panic of 1874. Again, this is now I'm going to explain the interesting thing about this. Robert Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's oldest son, he was at his father's assassination. Well, he wasn't at it, but he was there when his father was assassinated. He got to the house across the street from Ford's Theater. He was in the train station when Garfield got assassinated because he was Garfield's Secretary of War. And he was, I believe, 2 tenths away at McKinley's assassination because he was visiting the exposition the same day. After McKinley was shot, he refused to ever be near a president again. So I thought that was an interesting little fact. McKinley also will be another one. He actually didn't die immediately. He would survive for a period. Theodore Roosevelt, I'm a big TR fan. He would be recalled from his recess where he would assume a stewardship, so to speak, for a few days until McKinley did subsequently die. And then from there, he would be sworn in as the youngest president of the United States. But McKinley will die from his wounds. Next, we have Theodore Roosevelt. Now, Theodore Roosevelt is an interesting one, and I did a video about him, too. He was actually shot in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on October 14th, 1912. Now, what's a little different was he was shot by a man named John Flamin Schrank. Now, the difference between him and McKinley, and everyone before so far, TR was not actually president when he was shot. He was campaigning to for a third term. He had stepped down after 2 terms following the precedent set by George Washington, but he believed William Howard Taft had betrayed the Republican Party and was going back on all of their policies. So when he did not win the primary, because a lot of people saw what he was doing, which that's up to debate. I think Theodore Roosevelt's still probably the best president this country's ever had. He ran a second party, and to be honest, that's what lost the Republicans the election of 1912, because Woodrow Wilson, though he did not have, if you were to have put all the Republican votes into one, it would have been a Republican landslide. There have actually been, a fun fact is there's actually been more Republican presidents than Democrat presidents. There's been 19 Republicans and 17 Democrats, and the Democrats are considered the older party. But that's also because post-Civil War, people had a very bad taste in their mouth for the Democrats. But, you know, the whole reason Shank shot Roosevelt wasn't actually... He's another one, though. He's mentally ill. He was a mentally ill guy. He said the ghost of William McKinley came to him and told him to exact revenge on Roosevelt because he believed Roosevelt had hand in McKinley's assassination. And Roosevelt will also be one of the only ones to confront his assassin, because after he was shot, he said, "Bring that man to me," and he actually pitied him. He's like, this poor guy. But he will be the next one. Following will actually be his second cousin, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt wasn't actually harmed or anything. It is a lot of debate if he was actually the target, but he was shot. He was shot at February 15th, 1933, in Miami, Florida. Now, I know that sounds very strange because Miami, Florida, is in the South. Roosevelt was a Northerner. Miami, Florida, used to be considered one of the Democrat Party strongholds. And that was until very recently. Very recently, the Democrat Party had a lot of power in Miami. That has fallen a lot. You could say demographics. You could say there's a very large Cuban population in Miami, so they often lean right due to the fact that they escape socialism, and they view Democrats as a... I'm not going to get into the ideologies and everything at this time. But the assassin's name was Giuseppe Zangara. And he's an interesting character in the fact that we don't know actually what his real motivations were. He said it was he blamed Hoover, I believe, for all his hardships. But he didn't want to go to Washington because it was too cold because of the time of the year. February, obviously, is a cold time of year. So instead, he's like, I can't get Hoover. I'll get Roosevelt, though, in Miami. But interesting fact is a lot of people don't think he was the target. They think Zangara was actually working for the mob, and it was actually Mayor Anton Cermak, who did get killed, who was the actual target. Giuseppe would later be killed by electric chair. There will be an attempt on President Harry S. Truman, November 1st, 1950, at the Blair House. Now, Blair House is right across from the White House. That's actually where the president spends their first night before the inauguration into office, by Oscar Collazo and Giselle Terezzo. Truman was unharmed, but a Secret Serviceman was killed, and Terezzo was killed by law enforcement. Now, the next one. This is the big one. John F. Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas. Lee Harvey Oswald, as the tale goes, shot at him from the book depository. We will never know if the Oswald... And the thing is, it's interesting because I've been, watching my co-historians online as well as some political channels, and they make a good point. 10 years ago, you'd be called a maniac to say that it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. But nowadays, people are... It's kind of like what happened on the island in the Caribbean, so to speak. At this time in history, people are a little more willing to accept what they think is the fact, and no one really knows what really happened, all that is known is the president was killed, and Lyndon B. Johnson will be sworn in on Air Force One. If we want to go with Lee Harvey Oswald, the man was mentally ill. The man had a lot of problems. The man had to renounce his American citizenship, which made him a target for the administrative state as it was. He was a very ill man, so to speak. Again, I have a series on all this. If you want to go more in depth, I do have videos about it. Next is going to be Richard Nixon, February 22nd, 1974, by Samuel Bick. Samuel Bick, another guy. The guy was down on his luck. The guy was a Democrat, I guess you could say activist. I'm not exactly sure what I would describe him as. He did a lot of activism for the Democratic Party, but he was a mentally ill man as well. What he did was he attempted to hijack a plane. They never even got off the tarmac, as far as I'm aware, by gunpoint. And his intentions were to fly the plane into the White House and kill the president. He, like I said, he never made it off the tarmac, so it doesn't really. But there were many people wounded, and Bick will kill himself in the process. Again, we're seeing this sad reality. Gerald Ford will have Sarah Jane Moon and Lynette Squeaky Fromm. One woman is a typist who was mentally ill, and the other, now they didn't actually work together, they were just back to back, literally back to back. Fromm will be September 5th, 1975, and then Moore will be September 22nd, 1975, literally almost 2 weeks apart. But it's very, both were very mentally ill. One of them was a member of the Manson family who was doing it for Charles Manson's attention. So obviously, as we continue, this is the correlation. Raymond Lee Harvey, May 5th, 1979, will make an attempt on Jimmy Carter, another mentally ill man. Harvey was arrested before he could carry out his assassination attempt. Ronald Reagan, another famous one, May 30th, 1981, by John Hinckley Jr. John Hinckley Jr., extremely mentally ill man. John Hinckley Jr. is actually still alive, as is, I believe, Moore might be still alive. But John Hinckley Jr. Had become infatuated with the actress Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster was young. He fell in love with her while seeing the movie Taxi Driver, which is highly inappropriate because she was a kid. He actually followed her around the country and would leave letters at her door and everything, and he thought that if he were to shoot President Reagan, it would not only get her attention, but it would make her fall in love with him. Obviously, Jodie Foster did not fall in love with him, and President Reagan was shot, wounded. His press secretary Baker was shot, made paraplegic, and it really, it was just horrific. That was the most recent giant lapse in Secret Service security until the 13th. President Clinton, October 29th, 1994, an attempt was made on him in Manila, Philippines by a group attached to Al-Qaeda. Now we're going again back into the, there's an ideology behind why they're doing what they're doing. This falls into the ranks with Booth and Leon Czolgosz. And then President George W. Bush, May 10th, 2005, in Georgia, a man threw a grenade at him. Vladimir Otoryan. Now, that brings us up to now, and I already mentioned the letter to President Obama. Letter laced with ricin. This is not something new, sadly. Assassinations of leaders has happened since Rome, since even before Rome. Nero was assassinated, Caligula was assassinated, these famous people. Julius Caesar was assassinated. In fact, in the early days of the Trump administration, one of the most controversial things that happened was actually in my home state. New York City hosts Artists in the Park, and they were doing a modern rendition of Julius Caesar from Shakespeare. Now, Trump kind of fit perfectly into it because Trump was viewed as a populist, even though he was an elitist. Caesar was viewed as a populist, even though he was an elitist. But the issue was you had the sitting president of the United States being caricatured on stage and murdered on stage by members of the federal government in the middle of a public park. Now, there's a question of, is it art or is it a threat? Of course. People have they've been making modern renditions of Shakespeare for years. Debatably, Disney's The Lion King is a modern depiction of Hamlet, or Lion King 2 is of Romeo and Juliet. They've made actual, like, Coriolanus is a Shakespearean play about the Roman consul Coriolanus who betrayed Rome. This isn't a new thing. They've made modern Romeo and Juliet, but the issue is, in a political climate, why are you poking the bear? And this goes into the bigger question, and I mentioned this when I was talking about President McKinley, of this idea of this man's a threat. The young man, let's get his name. Let's get his name so we're right. Like I said, I wanted to wait until we saw the House hearing before I discuss this, and I wasn't going to discuss this, but I thought it was important, because I think us as historians, is our job to record even things that that is happening as we're speaking. So give me 1 second. I want to get his name right, as my family informed me recently. They get very annoyed when I don't get correct dates and everything. So that's why I'm being very careful right now, especially with a subject like this. So give me 1 moment. And as you notice, I'm not doing this in my usual way. I don't have a script, and I'm not doing this my usual way when I'm going unscripted. I'm making sure we have everything, so just bear with me. Thomas Matthew Crooks. This young man, clearly mentally ill. I'm not going to entertain any of the other theories of what happened, because I can only work with what I know. That's all I can work with. I can't say if there was another shooter, as other people have suggested. I can't say if there was any inclusion of any other entities. I can only say what is known at this moment. There was a giant lapse in security. At this time, Kimberly Cheadle, the Secret Service director, has resigned. Justifiably so. And this could have been bad. This could have been bad. Now, President Trump, of course, is a very controversial character. However, it's not like we haven't had other controversial presidents. President Bill Clinton was very controversial. President Warren Harding was a very controversial president. James Buchanan. We've always had very controversial presidents, but we've also never had the media apparatus that we have today. And what happens is, Thomas Crook he's 20. He grew up his entire political life, his entire adult life. I know 20. And when I say adult life, I just mean that he could start making decisions and thinking on his own. He spent his entire, from probably the age of 11 until now, hearing one thing. This man's a monster. This man's a threat. This man's this. This man's that. Now, and people make a point to say, well, he voted Republican. He's registered as a Republican. He donated to President Biden. But he's a Republican, but he donated. That's not the point. This isn't a political discussion. The issue is that this kid, regardless of what he is, because I want something you should know. Lee Harvey Oswald was a registered Democrat. Charles J. Guiteau was not only a registered Republican, but a Republican activist. Just because you're registered in the party doesn't mean that you at all agree with that person. Look at the Lincoln Project. It's a whole faction of the Republican Party that does not fall in line with Trump. And the same thing on the Democrats. You have the pro-Palestine movement. They hate President Biden. That's just the reality. If you are lockstep with a political party, that's a problem. But that's not the problem here. The problem is here, you had a mentally ill child who has been being fed the same line his entire life at this point. I know, 9 years isn't a lot. But for a kid, that is. For a kid that wakes up every day and he hears on the news, oh, he's going to start war, he's going to do that, and then, and I'm not taking a political side here. This is a big issue, especially in the historian YouTube sphere. We try to stay neutral and unbiased because it's so easy for debates to break out on our channels, and we don't want that. We want people to learn about history. That's why we're here. We're not here to debate who did what or why this was done. We're here to discuss what has been. And that's why I waited to discuss this, because I wanted to listen to what former Secret Service Director Cheadle had to say. But what ended up happening was I sat there and I listened to a 4.5-hour House hearing that not a single question was answered. But it's important in this moment, as Americans, to reflect on everything. People say we're more polarized than ever right now. That's not exactly true. We fought a civil war. As this channel knows, because it's one of the subjects I cover extensively. It's one of the subjects I'm most versed in, is the American Civil War. Things are definitely polarized, though. And there's this thing being now echoed by everyone. We need to turn down the heat. We need to turn down the heat. Yes, we do. Everyone does. Empty platitudes are extremely dangerous. And that's what's so concerning about what happened, is the second it happened, everyone's switched. And then 2 days later, they switch back to the same rhetoric. And you see these people online, the disgusting things they were saying. If you don't know this yet, I am a Catholic. I believe people are not inherently evil. I believe we all have the capabilities of evil, but I do not believe people are inherently evil. I have been seeing evil things. You never wish harm on anyone, regardless. Even your worst enemy, you don't wish harm on. I don't think people realize how close the 13th was to something very, very bad. And, I was with family, and I was thinking of this play. There's this play by Stephen Sondheim. It's very good. It's called Assassins. It's about the 13 or 12, not all the people I listed, but the majority of them, who attempted or succeeded in killing U.S. presidents. Pretty much Booth is the main act, and then it's followed by Chogash and Guiteau and all of them, and then it crescendos into a song called Take a Shot, Lee, which is all of them convincing Lee Harvey Oswald, to take the shot at Kennedy. And then after that song, a song comes on called Something Just Broke. Because, to be honest, and I think this is something the country in general, and I'm going to have another video where I'm probably going to have to be discussing politics about what happened Sunday, but the song Something Just Broke, the play is inherently showing the selfishness of the assassins. They're only thinking about themselves. There's a song that it's called the new national anthem, which is pretty much the assassin saying, when's it my turn? When do I get what I want? Where's my American dream? Now, my belief in the United States is the American dream is not something you're owed. It's something you earn. You go out and make your American dream. Thousands of people do it. The issue is a lot of people have given up on it. But it's always out there. The song Something Just Broke, though, is about how the rest of the world reacts to what these assassins have done. You know, I was working in the classroom and, you know, someone said the president's been shot. And it's just showing how broken the society becomes in such an action. Because regardless, and there comes a part where they say there are presidents that are forgotten. And they start listing off some of them. And, you know, Abraham Lincoln is not a good example because Abraham Lincoln was the president in charge during the Civil War. But also, Abraham Lincoln, because he was assassinated, it becomes hard to criticize him because we look at him as a martyr who died for the American Civil War, but then we ignore that he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, which is one of our founding rights as citizens. He arrested Supreme Court justices and congressmen who disagreed with his actions on the war, but because of the martyrdom of it, we forget that. But also, we just see the effect it has on the country as a whole. Regardless if it's a good president or bad president, that's our leader. And this was a point a lot of people were making following the 13th. You know, no, everyone was like, I wouldn't want to see President Biden in that situation either. And no one would. No one would want to see President Biden. No one would see President Bush. No one would see President Obama. No one would see President Carter. It's horrible. It's a horrifying thing. It's a horrifying thing for the families. And sadly, a man was killed, Corey Compouture, who I'm going to find the link and I'm going to put it in the bomb for his family's GoFundMe because it's very sad. He died defending his children, his wife and children. And 2 others were shot on the 13th. But it's our job as historians, you know, much like when Queen Elizabeth died, as much as everyone on this channel hated it, because the majority of my viewers are American, and I know you guys don't care, but it was history. It's not every day, which, to be honest, in the near future, King Charles will pass away, and there will be another royal funeral and coronation. But this situation is such a horrific incident, and it's something that must be talked about because it was so horrific. And something this kid, Crooks, was clearly very disturbed. The question now to ask is not who to blame, because there's only one person to blame at this point, the Secret Service, that this happened. Like, and that's why I'm not going to go deep into it, because the thing is, if you're trying to convince me that a 20-year-old mentally ill kid was able to outwit one of the most elite Secret Services in the world, if you're trying to convince me of that, I have a bridge to sell you. But with that said, I hope we all hold on to our loved ones a little tighter. And I hope we all think smart and we just try to simmer down the heat. And I'm going to be honest, a lot more political things are going to be coming up on this channel. We're in a presidential election season. And the thing is, a lot of people don't understand the system, and that falls on the education system. It does. I'm just going to say that right out. And that's why a lot of us have been rising up as channels, because our education system failed us. But please think smart. Please be with your loved ones. Please kiss them a little harder. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.